If you truly want to 10x, then you've got to change the game. You've actually got to turn things upside down on its head, because to get to 10x, and 10x is qualitative, not quantitative, to get to 10x, you've really got to stop doing most of what you used to do and then start doing some completely different things. And that's really difficult for most people.
Welcome to Tip Top Grow Up Your Business with Metronomics. Join me, Shannon Burns-Susko, and Metronomics Certified Coach, Ged Roberts.
We'll be talking to business thought leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business team coaches who have all taken the journey to grow up their businesses to their tip top.
We'll be sharing strategies, systems, stories on how you can grow your company up at the speed you want.
If you're searching for your path to the tip top and feel your time is running out, then this podcast is for you.
And good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Today I'm with Stuart Wachs, who's based out in Arizona. Now, Stuart is also a Metronomics coach. I've known Stuart for about 2-3 years now. I think we met at our first conference in Whistler a while back. How are you, Stuart?
I'm doing excellent. It's a good time to be from Arizona. This is our good season. It's sunny in the 60s and 70s. So life is good these months in Arizona.
So, Stuart, today we're going to talk about a book that's made a profound impact on many of us coaches and many other people out there. The book is 10x is easier than 2x, which is a bit of a contradictory statement to a lot of people, a counterintuitive statement, maybe. But today we want to unpick that and try and drill out into some of the concepts in there. Now, I know that you've read this book probably several times, as I have, and Ben was actually a speaker at our conference earlier this year where he just blew us away. The man has a brain bigger than a planet, and what he has achieved in his short life is absolutely phenomenal. So Stuart, what led you to this book?
I actually think, I don't know if it was Shannon or someone from Metronomics had put it out there, and this immediately that concept grabs you, because everybody, whether from the coach's perspective or business owner's perspective, wants a 10x, but just that coming around and saying 10x is easier than 2x is very counterintuitive, and one would think is maybe not factual. So it just immediately grabs you. And instantly, as I started reading the book, both from the lens I've run and owned businesses and now as a coach and just as a human, it just grabs you because it's written by brilliant business mind and psychiatrist mind, and it really takes that whole mind and business model and wraps it up into one. And believe it or not, when you finish reading it and devouring it, and then like you said, we were blessed to spend a good chunk of a day with Ben Hardy at the Tip Top in Whistler and learn right from one of the two authors. It is absolutely true. And I remember as I'm reading it and trying to is this real? And I forgot where in the book, as they're talking to you and you're thinking, there was one line of, sure, you can 10x yourself. Do you remember when you went from crawling to walking? And it kind of just clicked. I'm like, yeah, that's definitively 10xing. That's maybe 20xing if there's such a thing. So it really grabs you. And I found that, I don't know about life-changing, but incredibly impactful, both personal life, my practice as a coach, and then its impact on clients and colleagues that I shared it with.
As coaches, we are trained to teach CEOs and leaders on how to focus, and the concept of focus is not new and to any coach out there. But Ben takes it one step further, doesn't he? Because he's basically saying, well, if you're going to 2x, you're just doing a little bit more of what you're doing right now. But if you truly want to 10x, then you've got to change the game. You've actually got to turn things upside down on its head, because to get to 10x, and 10x is qualitative, not quantitative, to get to 10x, you've really got to stop doing most of what you used to do and then start doing some completely different things. And that's really difficult for most people. And I struggled with that idea to begin with because, and could have throw out some sort of references to other books here, because we got to where we are right now because of what we've done in the past. And to throw all that away, that's our comfort zone, and that gets very, very uncomfortable. So to get used to the idea of 10xing, you've got to start sort of getting used to being uncomfortable, because all the things that made you successful in the past are not going to get you to 10x. They might get you to 2x, doing a little bit more, a little bit harder, a little bit further, but it's not going to get you to 10x.
Absolutely, Jen. I remember talk a little bit from the book and then a little bit one of the exercises he took us coaches through last April was, really this stuff. It really is a mindset. I mean, there's a lot of systems and process to actually implementing it, but there's that mindset because, that 2X mindset is really continuing doing what you're doing. You might nuance it a little bit, massage it a little bit, and you might have a little bit of growth. You might sustain where you're at, but it's comfortable. It's present day knowledge. I know I did this last quarter or last year and it had this positive or negative effect. And all of a sudden you're blowing that up and kind of letting that future pull you forward and all the things that you think matter. That old 80-20 rule, which I'm sure we'll get into, most of what we really think is important and critical and we're spending our time on really isn't what's going to move that big needle, get us to that BHAG, move us forward. And I remember when he was working with all of his coaches, he did a lot to prep us. And I think all or most of us had read the book, so we were familiar. And then he asked us all to write down all the things. I don't know if he said for the next quarter or for the next year, you're going to stop doing so you can really 10x it. And I remember at first struggling, and then that mindset shift just happened, probably because we had him in the room. And I'm not a fast typer, but the keyboard couldn't keep up with me. It was so freeing to kind of let myself go and not be bound to the past and the things I thought were important and really just let that, as he says, and it's a lot of what we do with Metronomics with the BHAG, let that future pull you forward rather than planning for it. And it really just becomes natural when you can change that mindset and freeing. A lot of work to do, but very freeing when you let it just kind of flow out of you.
And if you're okay to share, Stuart, what have you let go of since getting deep into the book?
Absolutely. From reading the book and then tip top overall, highly recommend it. And working with Metronomics coaches and then the time spent with Ben Hardy. Some of the things I let go of, one is I was in a whole variety. I'm relatively new as a full-time Metronomics coach, so I'm still in that building the practice stage. So business development sales is a big part of what I spend my time and was spending time on. And I was in 3 or 4 different networking groups and spending a lot of time with them. And they really weren't the right ones for me. It felt good. I could check the box. I was in networking and in these networking groups, but a lot of people weren't wired in the way as really just wanting to give and provide. So I dropped out of 2 of those networking groups. I also, because I was in, build up mode, was doing some coaching and consulting for another pretty well-known firm in town. And it brought in revenue and got me in front of people, but it really was, when I thought about it, a big distraction because it wasn't the style of coaching, it wasn't the platform, and it really wasn't me. So even though at a time of really just startup, letting go of that revenue and that relationship, I did, I think within a week of getting back from doing the work on 10X. And that was a financial hit, but it felt great. So I cleared that up. And probably the biggest thing I did was go back to my core customer and really think of what my 3HAG was and what my BHAG was and what was really going to get me there from revenue and my big edge statement and what my purpose was, and significantly refine my core customer, which was powerful because other thing I recognized without intent, I was out spending a lot of time with a lot of people that really weren't the right people. Whether they were going to hire me or not, they weren't the right people for me and them to be successful or for me to enjoy what I was doing. So really that tightening and super refining of the core customer was a powerful thing that let me let go of a lot of the stuff that was just volume, that kind of shift from quantitative to qualitative. And that was powerful, just in some client growth and in spending my time a little more in that 20% zone than in that 80% zone.
One of the things I've done since sort of meeting Ben and going through the books was I've completely outsourced all of my lead gen and marketing and all of my finance and all of my administration. Because the thing that's going to get me to the next level is not me filling in expenses and producing P&Ls. It's actually going out there and working with CEOs and leadership teams to get them to where they want to be. So focus on that 20% and let go of the 80%. But it's hard, and sometimes it costs.
I forgot 2 things, which kind of piggybacks on what you're saying. I'm a numbers guy. I enjoy numbers as much as I enjoy the people side. And because it's a smaller operation, I was doing a lot of the books and financial stuff. Had a bookkeeper and accountant, pushed all that over to her. And even though not a big operation, hired an assistant to exactly your point. And it was a fantastic move from really focusing on that important stuff.
Now, if you're enjoying this conversation about 10x is better than 2x, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you get notifications of the next episodes as they come out. Now, Stuart, you mentioned going from BHAG down to 3HAG, and talking to Ben at our session in Whistler earlier this year, one of the things he challenged us to is, within Metronomics, we have this concept of the BHAG from Jim Collins and then the 3HAG. Now, 3HAG is highly achievable. But what Ben challenged us to think about was, well, okay, what if you took your BHAG, your long-term goal, and you brought it in closer to become your 3HAG? So why don't you try and challenge yourself to achieving what you wanted to do in a long term over the medium term? And initially, to me, that was contradictory, because the H and the A in 3HAG is highly achievable, right, and your BHAG isn't supposed to be highly achievable. But then after a while, you start to get used to the idea that, well, actually, maybe I wasn't thinking big enough for my 3HAG, and actually what I can achieve, what is highly achievable, is still much more than I originally thought I could do. So has that changed your 3HAG?
It definitely changed the 3HAG and changed how I operate, and part of this concept of you have your BHAG or your long-term, depending on where you're at. That might be an 8-year or a 10-year or a 20-year big, hairy, audacious goal. And, then we operate on that 3-year highly achievable goal, which leads to our annual planning, is when you first think, okay, whatever that big, I'm going to be a global company or $100 million company and I'm only at 5 million, whatever it is, which is scary and sounds impossible, but you plant it out there and let it pull you. And then you start thinking about, instead of 15 or 20 years, I'm going to do that in 3. It's real scary. But one of the things I found fascinating, when both in the book and then Ben walking us through it, was the whole concept of raising the floor. And there's a real cool graphic he had that if your goal is just 5 million or to, be the leader in Arizona, there's all kinds of things you can be focusing on, broad amount of markets, broad amount of type of clients, broad amount of coaches you bring on or new product development, whatever your business will be. And all of a sudden you pull that BHAG and you pull it all the way up and put it right in your face in 3 years. To do that, you have to raise the floor. Because all of a sudden, man, if I'm going to be a $50 million enterprise in 3 years, not 20, there's so many things that you would say, I can't do that unless, and all of a sudden you just only can focus on those unlesses. And a lot of that, what I'll call noise, there were like 400 things you could do. Now ends up falling off in that box. There's only like 8 things. So you really have to focus on those big things. You mentioned a couple times about qualitative over quantitative and those really big ideas. And actually 10X is about doing way less, but the things that matter are not about doing more. So you actually get your life back, your team gets their life back. So that whole concept of 3HAGing your BHAG, getting your long-term goal done in 3 years and raising the floor and isolating, okay, now I can only do, these are those unlesses, so I got to focus on those. And I think Ben shared a story that he had spent an enormous amount of money and time and effort because he thought part of getting his goal was this major podcast and social media following, and he had spent all the time and had grown it up to some big number. When he pulled his BHAG forward, he recognized that's really not going to get it there. He just stopped it, dropped it, and did something that had been one of his prime focuses. And it's interesting, started using the whole 10X concept with some clients. And there's one, actually, we added it into their 2-day kickoff. Small minute, we had them all read the 10X book, and they're a great team. Every one of them had read it and came with their notes and ideas. And through this whole concept of pulling that future, letting it pull you forward and shortening up that distance, and what are you going to stop doing? They had really great conversation. There was a major initiative. They had raised a lot of capital before. It had been one of their top priorities for the last 4 years. And they're still looking into it, but most likely they're going to completely cancel the initiative because to get to their BHAG, that actually wasn't what's going to move the needle the best. So it's fascinating and so powerful, the conversations, process, and then ultimately decisions it can make.
I remember that image, and subject to copyright, we'll see if we can get an image for the video on the podcast. But it was such a simple image, wasn't it? It was just a series of bars of different heights with a rectangle superimposed over the top. And he talked about the concept of raising the floor and raising the ceiling. And once you do that, lots and lots of those bars, the things that aren't going to get you to 10x, they fall out of the ceiling, out of the floor. They fall out of the floor, so they're not going to get you to 10x. So then the challenge is, okay, identifying what those things are and then stopping them. And if you look at Ben Hardy's YouTube channel, there is a date at which he no longer posted videos from his previous series. He just stopped all of that, which was one of his major focuses before.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really fascinating, and it works. And it's great when the co-author and creator proof in the pudding what he did, which it had to be. If you think about all the effort he put in, that had to be a real tough decision to make.
Yeah. And if we look at the book, I mean, one of the things that I often forget is, this is actually not really Ben Hardy's book. It's really Dan Sullivan's book. Ben Hardy is just writing around the ideas and the concepts that Dan Sullivan's been talking about for years, as part of Strategic Coach. And I always thought of this as Ben's book, but it's actually, Ben's interpretation of Dan Sullivan's ideas. And the reason I mention that is because one of Dan Sullivan's ideas is the gap and the gain. To really get to the point where you can think about 10xing what you do, you've got to be living in the gain and not the gap.
I have, and I actually love both, for me personally, my practice and clients, that whole concept of gap or gain, because unfortunately human nature, almost everybody at points in their life lives in the gap, which means you're focused on where you haven't achieved yet or what others have achieved, or you set that long-term goal and you haven't hit it yet, so you're in the gap. And not only does that not ultimately work for process and models for growth, just emotionally and psychologically, it's damaging. It's like not a pleasant place to live. And all of a sudden, flipping that ahead and living in the gain, which is part of that whole mindset, and then 10xing, you're celebrating, you're living on those gains that are getting you there. So my long-term goal, or even 3-year goal, I'm getting 50 million, just to use a revenue as a number. But my, 1 year was 15 million and I'm at 18 million. That's a heck of a gain. Yes, there's still a gap. I'm 12 million shy. So that whole concept for one personally, in our life, in our relationships, and working with our teams, because how often do we have our KPI or OKR or KPI or our widgets, and we're working with a team and they haven't quite made it to that one that's down the road, and we're wondering why, and we're pressing them on it, when they made some great progress. So it's a wonderful mindset shift. Yes, you still have to have those goals, they have to pull you, but living in that gain and celebrating that gain and going from gain to gain to gain, that's what gets that momentum going, that ultimately that gap will shrink and disappear, and you'll have to be setting a new gap.
Entrepreneurs often have a habit of living in the gap because they are incredibly hard on themselves and incredibly hard on their teams. And they want to focus on what has yet to be achieved, what has yet to be done, rather than what has been done or what has been achieved. And that's a real blocker, because you're constantly bringing in that sort of that negativity that we haven't yet done that into your life, and challenging them to turn that around, to think about the successes and the wins. Yeah, you don't ignore the failures, you don't ignore the things you still got to do, but you also focus on the things that you have done. And I challenge the CEOs I work with, if you can't think of 3 things that you've done in the last 24 hours that put a smile on your face, you're probably living in the gap, and you need to focus on the gain. Yeah. What have you done in the last 24 hours that's putting a smile on your face, or putting a smile on the face of someone else?
Yeah, it's all part of that positive mindset, living in an abundance mindset, which is a big part of the book. And that abundance mindset is a big shift from the 2X mentality to the 10X mentality. And, positive affirmations, it might sound hokey, but it's really powerful stuff that you're absolutely right. Founders, entrepreneurs, even hired CEOs, it typically doesn't come natural because of how we're initially wired. So it's a powerful shift for culture and growth.
there's a section in the book, and you referenced this earlier on about, going from crawling to walking, which is, 10x or even 20x. And one of the things that Ben challenged us to do, another thing he challenged us to do when we spent time with him was, go back through your personal history, your past, and come up with 5 areas that you've 10x'd yourself, you've 10x'd your own life. And I guess, I thought, well, that's crazy. I've never 10x'd. And when you think about it, you inevitably have. I used to be, I was an engineer for years, and then I went from an engineer and I completely changed my industry and ended up sort of building very, very large software systems. And that took letting go of all the things that got me to be a chartered engineer, that 10 years of study and letting all that go and moving to a completely different industry. And then I went into running companies, which was another 10x. And then I went from running companies to being a coach. And yeah, we've each individually 10x'd in so many ways. It's just a question of thinking them through and articulating them to yourself.
Absolutely. And I love your examples, and I could share the same. I've gone from industry to industry, from nonprofit to for-profit, from being a hired CEO to a company founder, and as so many people have, and every one of those is absolutely 10xing, because for you to be successful, you have to let go. You have to let that new future pull you forward, and you have to change that mindset as you go. So it really is a powerful tool as we look at our own lives and can reflect on. And then as we move forward, we can do. And I would say, I think it's real important, since most of the people we work with, and most companies of any size over a few million, even at that level, have some type of leadership team, for that founder, CEO, head of company to remember this in his team, because you don't have to leave a company to 10x. There's opportunities for your COO, CMO, CTO, whatever your roles are, to 10x themselves within the company, within their role, within other roles, to really deliver this in your company. It's how you grow your team. You grow your team, you grow your company, you grow your life. So all these pieces of 10xing really fit really well with what we do with Leading for Compounding Growth and everything we do with the Metronomics, and really are critical elements you can focus on within all the different systems and paths of growth.
Stuart, are you familiar of the concept of I want what I want, which Dan Sullivan talks about in
the wants
the
and
book?
the needs?
Yeah, indeed. And that's something I struggled with, and I think I'm probably still struggling with.
Me as well.
Okay. Well, we're in good company then. Yeah. Well, how do you see that concept? Because we each have a different perspective on it, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had always used it, some in professional, but definitely in personal life, whether it was kids or a wife. I'm saying, well, that's just a want, not a need. Kind of the converse of what Dan and Ben talk about in the book, where a need is the important thing. But the kind of mind shift on that one, which I still sometimes struggle with, but it's free and it kind of gets you into that abundance mindset, that 10x mindset, is no, it's really about your wants. Because if it's a want, it's okay. If I want to be the leading company in all of the United States, or the leading producer of, or to go to be $1 billion company, I don't have to justify that want. A need, you have to justify. A want, you don't have to justify to anybody. It's clean. You can dream it. You can plan around it. It can become part of that BAG and purpose and pull you forward. So it's really kind of a shift how I, in my old school way of thinking, was brought up and trained, that wants in this context are actually the important thing and should be the framework, not the needs, because it's so freeing to how you lead, how you grow, and how you do. So I don't know your interpretation of how you do it, but that's what I find fascinating. And I, struggle or regularly have to kind of remind and reshift, whether it's for myself or with clients, because it's so easy to get into the needs and the tactics of everything, where it's an important element of this 10xing.
Now, I'm going to come back to I want what I want in just a moment, but if you want to get more insights and ideas like this from this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, I want what I want is something that I really struggled with, because I guess humility is a big thing for me. It's part of my upbringing. I'm not an extrovert. I'm very much an introvert. And one of the things I absolutely hate is people that are so out there that they're in your face. And now that to me, the show-offs is probably what an English person would call them. And the notion of wanting something just because you want it, well, that's selfish, isn't it? But no, it's not. It's not. It's about abundance, because just because you want something doesn't mean someone else isn't going to get it. It's up to them. It's up to them. So if I want something, I shouldn't have to justify it to anyone. And if I want something, then I'm much more likely to get it than if I need it. But it's that abundance mindset, and it talks a lot about the Dan Sullivan's concepts of the 4 freedoms. Now, the freedom of time, the freedom of money, the freedom of relationships, and the freedom of purpose. And I think one of the things that brings a lot of us coaches into being coaches is that first freedom, the freedom of time. When I probably work 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I look after my granddaughter, I cook, I spend time in the garden, I travel. And I couldn't do that if I wasn't doing what I do. But I got to do that because I wanted freedom of time. I really, really wanted freedom of time. The idea of doing another 10, 15, 20 years working 5 days a week, that was abhorrent to me. So I had to find a way of not doing that.
Yeah. No, and I think we're similar in this case. I also Midwest bringing up, so that whole humility thing and wants were kind of put down here, but it when you change the framework of what a want is, it opens it up. It lets you dream. It lets you be comfortable in that BHAG, and it lets you be comfortable in wanting to, because if you don't want to 10X, you're never going to 10X. So it lets you be comfortable even stating, I want whatever that 10X is. And it's not always revenue. A lot of times revenue is tied to it. Whatever that 10X is, by getting that I want, even if you say it like you said, which makes me crawl a little bit, I want what I want, but it's true. That's really the whole concept of it. So I think beautifully said, Ged.
We haven't talked specifically about the 80-20 concept. I mean, we've mentioned it in passing, and a lot of people think of Pareto analysis, or however you pronounce it. I never sure if I've actually got that right. But this is slightly different, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's slightly different, isn't it?
Burrito, you were there.
Yeah.
Trust me, I just pronounced plenty of things.
Yeah, and in terms of the concept, Ben looks at it slightly differently.
The way I interpret from reading the book and listening, and then in my practice, that 80-20 rule is, and it's been proven out in plenty of books and science, that if you take the most disciplined CEO, COO, founder, whatever person, and they think they're focused, and in their mind they're focused, if you really log their time and look what really is going to move the needle, 80% of where we're spending our time and putting our effort in is barely or not at all the stuff that's going to move the needle. So the concept within getting why 10X, actually when you live and practice all this stuff, is literally easier than 2X, because 2X is grinding. Nothing against grinding, but that's what's going to get your 2X, is that if you can get rid of, I don't think anybody can ever get rid of all that 80%. I know I sure haven't found that path. But you can just get rid of, 30% to 80%, and now 50% of where you're spending your time is quality time spent on those things, to use that little rectangle and raising the floor, the things that really matter for you, for your company, your organization, to 10X, to grow, to get what you want to get. Your growth happens. You've got so much more time, whether it's to focus on that or to travel and cook and whatever our passions are. And that's where I regularly, not meaning daily or weekly, but minimally once a quarter, but I'd like to think close to once a month, relook at all of my tasks and where I don't log everything I'm doing, but where I'm spending my time, what my goals are, how I'm my mind at 10X. And I catch myself that a good chunk of where I'm spending my time really isn't it. And I'll either transfer it to spend more time, or I might just have more time in my day. So that's the power of 80-20. There's been so many studies that really concretely prove it out. And I think any of us coaches, business people listening to this podcast, if you thought about just the last 2 days, and even if it's not personal, just work, the things you filled your time with, you're probably going to be, if you're honest, somewhere in that 80% range that's not moving the needle.
Yeah, and the whole Pareto analysis concept is more of a, isn't this interesting? You're going to get the most impact from the 20%, but most people spend the rest of their time, or most of their time, in the 80%. Isn't that interesting?
Which was a long-standing exercise of that stop-start. What am I going to start doing? Am I going to stop doing? It's not from 10X, but it's the same kind of thing that if you've ever gone through that exercise or had a coach or a leader kind of take you through it, kind of like what Ben did with us when we started, rattling up all this stuff. When you free yourself, you realize you can really trim down. And when you're that business owner, entrepreneur, founder, and you're grinding and you're putting 80, 90 hours in, think of that trim. If nothing else, now maybe you can only work 60 hours and have the same and most likely a much better result. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in 10X about that, and the whole area of, is it Kairos? There's a Greek name, the whole thing about taking time off and free days and focus days and buffer days. And I'm not as disciplined on that as I should be, but it's similar to really, you've got to treat yourself in a way that you can grow for your company to grow.
I block out Mondays and Fridays, and occasionally I have to let those go. But most of the time, no, you're not booking time on Monday or Friday with me. I'm doing other things.
Yeah, no, it's great. In my calendar too, I haven't booked. Well, I do book out my weekends. It's a rare thing I'll do on a weekend, and I can't say never, but rare. But I'll block out chunks a day, whether it's for reading, whether it's for relaxing, whether it's for working out, that are as sacred to me as if it's a top prospect. That's that whole finding those free days for rejuvenation. I think in 10X, Ben and Dan say something like 150 days a year should be free days that you're rejuvenating, especially when you're at a senior leadership level and you've got so much going on, and it will not lessen your growth. It'll tremendously positively impact your growth.
Now, one of the things that I struggled with was, after having read 10X, is, okay, that's great. Understand it, sort of. Love the concept, love the ideas. Now, how do I actually do anything about this? How do I actually implement this? And I came across another book called by Dan Martell called Buy Back Your Time.
Okay.
And is that a book you've read, Stuart?
I've heard of it, but I have not read it, so I'm going to add it to my list. One of my KPI for this year is a book a month. Last year it was one every 6 weeks, so I'm building up my list. I'll add that to the list.
Yeah, I saw the stack you posted a couple of weeks back, and I've read most of those also.
I figured you probably did.
Yeah. But Buy Back Your Time, I suddenly realized that, well, actually, if you take 10X and you put Buy Back Your Time next to it, you basically got an implementation process, an implementation framework for 10X. So whereas I went from, I love this idea, I love this concept, but how do I implement it? I now have a tool that I can actually use to implement it. So Dan Martell's book is all about, okay, how do you identify what other things that are going to get you to the next level, get you to your 10X? And how do you get rid of the things that won't? How do you actually put a financial or an emotional or a value on individual things? And it even gives you formulas that you can use to say, well, I should continue doing this, or I should delegate this, or stop doing it in some way. So it's a framework. And as coaches, we all love frameworks, don't we?
That's why we all have those stacks of books, because we'll invent little pieces or how to use them, but there's so many great minds and great frameworks. And one thing I don't think we've mentioned, and I definitely bring up, this whole concept of 80-20, stop doing, doesn't necessarily mean that it then disappears. That's part of having an A-player leadership team, people around there with different strengths and different functions. We do, and most of us coaches in Metronomics do this, where we look at the leadership team and functions and key function, who's on them, and typically you've got that head of company or CEO on 5 of the 8 or whatever it is, which not good, no bueno. But some of the stopping might be no one's doing it because it's really not important for the company and for this growth. Or it might just be you, the CEO, founder, head of company, aren't going to do anymore. But boy, I'm that founder. This is not going to be in my suite, but this is so much in Jed's sweet spot and it's important. So Ged is now going to take that on and it becomes part of Jed's 20%. So it's not this necessarily cut off and don't do. It's who doesn't do, is it important for the company? If so, who's sweet spot and whose 20% does that fit into? So I just wanted to add that into it.
I'm not sure if that segue was intentional, but that was a beautiful segue to who, not how. You know,
but go ahead.
Ben's other book, which is exactly that. You know, now everyone needs who's to do the things that they don't want to do, because the who that you're delegating to someone else is probably something that's in their passion zone, something they love doing, something they get energy from. So find the right who's and don't focus on the hows, because that then becomes their passion, their excellence.
Beautiful. We be it business owners, CEOs, COOs, coaches, know that, that people side, soft side, whatever you want to call it, ultimately is everything. Yeah, all the other stuff, strategy, execution, cash, 10xing, but having the right who's to give it to, that have the ability and drive and trust to do it, boy, now you can pass all this stuff around, and everybody's main efforts are actually in their 20%, their sweet spot. And not only talk about exponential growth, 10xing, compounding growth, but think about the culture and the happiness of that team and cascading down when you've got people in their sweet spot. And if we examine it, as much as we have similar backgrounds in some ways and we're both coaches, our sweet spots are going to, 20% crossover and 80% be very different. So how cool is that when you got everybody in your leadership team, the majority of their time they're spending on their sweet 20% in every way? You're there. You're truly there.
And this is not a new concept. And going way, way back to Jim Collins, right person, right seat.
Right people in the seats, exactly. It's new twists, new approaches, new ways to evaluate and deliver. But you're absolutely right. It's been because that book's been around for a handful of years. I can't say at least 25, maybe longer than that. I don't know. It's been a good number of years, I hate to admit.
Okay, I think that pretty much wraps up our chat today. I've really enjoyed talking about 10x is easier than 2x. Stuart, any final thoughts from you, or is there anything you want our listeners and viewers to know about you?
Well, Jed, first of all, thanks for having me join you for this important topic and fun discussion. And I really gained a lot out of your insights, as well as the ability to share what I did. And I highly encourage anybody to read the book. Fantastic, inspirational, and will move you forward in whatever way you want and need to be moved forward. If you want to learn more about me and my practice within Metronomics and business growth, my website is www.impgp.com. It's the Impact Group. And you can also look me, Stuart Wachs, up on LinkedIn, or Impact Group up on LinkedIn as well. And happy to follow up with anybody on concepts and direction and implementation of 10X or anything else having to do with business growth, as I know Jed would as well. And really appreciate having the time to be on with you. Enjoyed my time.
Yeah, that was awesome, Stuart. Thanks so much.
Tip Top is brought to you by Metronomics.
To find out more about Metronomics and how this proven 20-year-old system will save you time and money as you grow up your business,
visit metronomics.com. That is metronomics.com.
Share your thoughts on today's episode in the comments and suggest topics you'd love us to explore the next time.
Also search for Metronomics in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else that great podcasts are found.